Well, the gift of humility. I wonder who's humble enough to confess today that you feel very humble. I just wonder how humble you feel today. I laugh about humility at times because I know that James and John, they get picked upon, particularly by their other disciple buddies. They're pretty upset at them. But it's quite refreshing to have some, two of them that are pretty bold. They say what they want. And I have to, sometimes people kind of, especially around us clergy, they kind of, sugarcoat it, but just get to the point. What do you really want? If somebody comes to my office, what do you really want? It's like Thanksgiving a couple weeks ago. We had my nephews, these lovely girlfriends they welcomed. First time meeting them. And one of the gals was very polite, but just said it like it was. And I remember my wife saying to her for the second time, "Would you like something to drink, like maybe some wine?" And this lovely lady looked to my wife and said, I told you I'm just fine. Like, basically, leave me alone, kind of thing. But she said it in a polite way. Well, my wife was reflecting, boy, that's pretty, just say it like it is. And James and John are doing that. They're just saying it like it is. I was trying to say to my son the other day, he wanted to go to the University of Guelph, we always wanted him to go to the University of Guelph. He wanted to go to Waterloo. And he had a little bit of pride in that. And so he's looking at graduate work. So yesterday I dropped him off at the university, and he gets out of the car. And I said, you're wearing this big, bold University of Waterloo. And he kind of goes, you bet I am. Waterloo, almost grad. And I said, but you're checking out Guelph for graduate work. And don't you think you should be a little more humble? He said, there's lots of time for humility later in life, not right now. And he came back to say that as much as he's liked Waterloo, the University of Guelph people were quite delightful. And I wanted to say today, I want to reflect on how I have felt humbled here at Trinity. I say this to my son all the time. Anytime he starts talking science and molecules and microbiology, I'm humbled because I don't have a clue what he's talking about. But I'm humbled here in the ways that at Trinity, I know there's people that show up with keys at the door at the last minute like today. There's all kinds of you out there that you bring people to church, you help somebody without even telling anybody in the world. You just help somebody when they need it the most. And you're doing that, every day of the week. And Holly Fair is just a few weeks away, and I go around Guelph, and I was even at the funeral home yesterday, and people were talking about, when's that Holly Fair? When's that fair coming? Like, it's well known in Guelph that Trinity works very hard, knows how to have a good time, and puts on a really good Holly Fair. So, and I know there's a little bit of pride in that, but I also think there's a lot of humility in the way that people serve so eagerly and excitedly and generously. Humility is an interesting thing. The disciples, they got a lesson in it, because as much as they wanted to sit on the right or the left, Jesus kind of surprises them. He doesn't really say yes or no, but he defers it to, it's God. It's actually God who's going to make that decision, not even me. But if you're able to drink the cup I drink, or if you're able to be baptized as I'm baptized, come and join the journey. But be prepared. This journey isn't for the faint of heart. It's not easy. It's a journey to serve and to take care of others. And it makes all the difference in the world. I was watching it's an independent movie release on, it's a comedy, but it's a comedy about the death of Stalin. And of course, those who know history know that Stalin was one of the most brutal dictators in Russia. And even at the time of his death, as this movie portrays, there are people that are like quietly clapping that he's died. There are other people who are lining up from all over the country to come one last respect to Stalin. He really had divided the Russian people. And in this movie, what you discover, and it's true in history, Stalin had gotten rid of or killed most of the doctors he thought were not helping him. They either went to Siberia or he killed them, but he killed thousands of people. And so in this movie, Stalin collapses, as he does literally, and he has a stroke. And his inner body, all the inner people come in panic that their dictator is unable to speak. And they look at each other and go, well, where are we going to get a doctor? And I'm thinking, I said, what are you talking about? And they seriously said, there isn't a good doctor left in Moscow. They're all in Siberia. And so it's a comedy. You have to realize it's a comedy. So they round up these funny 10 doctors from age 20 to 80. And they're just terrified because they're terrified that if they give the wrong prognosis that they're going to be shot, because that's the way of Stalin. And what the movie ultimately portrays is the farce, the comedy of Stalin did what he did so well because he was able to turn people against each other. That's why he succeeded. And nobody trusted anybody. Jesus offers a complete countercultural perspective to that. It's about placing your trust in God, being a servant, and that will mean suffering. It won't mean you will be at the top. But your life will be all the more meaningful, and this world will be all the more richer because of it. So I want to close with this. Martin Luther King Jr., God bless his spirit, 2 months before he was assassinated, he was preaching one of his final sermons at Ebenezer Church, Atlanta, Georgia. 5 years ago, I was in that church. I was in awe of the beauty of it and just the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr.'s spirit there. Social justice, racial equality. He spoke out against the war. But in this final sermon, he preached on this very passage. And it's just uncanny to think that in this sermon, months before he dies, he says, when I come to the end of my road and I am at a funeral, he said, there's one thing I want you all to know, is that I don't want you up there saying what degree or university I went to, because if you're a doctor here, or if you're a lawyer here, or whatever you are, you check who you are at the door. When you come into God's community, we're all God's children, and I am as well. And he just said, I hope that at my funeral, somebody says that I tried to make life better for another person. I tried to help the poor, the imprisoned. I tried my best to help the lonely. That's what I hope, that I'll be remembered as a servant of God. And an incredible message that he gave his congregation in 1968, February 4th. Months later, he would die, killed. Yesterday, I was at a beautiful ceremony for a friend of mine whose wife had fought courageously pancreatic cancer. I know a year or so ago, John had said to myself and my group of clergy friends that we meet monthly with, we all know that pancreatic cancer is one of those cancers that, we're all looking for miracles, of course, but it's not good news. And so we celebrated his wife's life yesterday, and her name is Mary. And Mary, I want to tell you this, she discovered in her journey her Scottish roots, and she went over to Scotland. And so yesterday's service was really her love of Celtic music and Celtic prayers. And I kind of smiled because this week, Drew, our custodian, I am humbled by a young 20-something-year-old that said to our staff, he said, I think we should go to the river run and go see Lusana. And I said to Drew, Lusana, what is that? Well, thanks, he says, to his dad, Doug, Drew said he started listening to this Celtic band, Lusana, from Ireland 3 years ago. Well, Thursday night at the river run, it's first time in Canada, they're playing a few concerts, and they're an incredibly gifted musicians, but the music is haunting. And so here I'm at this funeral yesterday, being grateful for what Drew introduced me to this week, listening to this music that was very similar to what I'd heard at River Run. And then to end the service off, there was 4 children. The son finally spoke after the other kids. He came forward, he had his kilt on. Krista gets up there, and he said, in honoring my mom, I said, there's 3 things. My mom said, wear your kilt. He had his kilt on. Number 2, wear your underwear. He said, checked. That's good. It's done. Then very profoundly, Kristen spoke about the news when his mom was first diagnosed with cancer. And he said she'd always been such a supporter. He became the cheerleader when she started her chemo last winter, and he was cheering her on. And this young man's in his 20s, just touching to think how he was cheering his mother on through chemo. Then he looked at us and he said, my mom told me to keep this short, which he did. He said, about February, I just became that child that I needed to become, and I went into panic, and I called my mother up, and he said, I'm embarrassed to say it, but I just went in a panic that, this is not going well, Mom, this is horrific, this can't be happening to you. And he just said, I was a mess. And he said, it was pretty honest of him. He was really expressing he was a boy, a son, grieving for his mom. And he said, I leave this with all of you today in great humility. His mother, by phone, said to her son, you have to realize something. I am flesh and bones, I'm a body, but I am far more than my body. I am an essence of all my relationships in my life. And as a son, you have to realize that even if I was to die tomorrow, I am still very much with you and with all whom I love. And she said, my Celtic teachings teach me this, that I will go back to my maker who I'm made from, and I will be okay, and you will be as well. So he looks out to everybody in the service, and he said, you need to know I miss my mom's flesh, and I miss giving hugs to her more than anything can ever imagine. But he said, I've learned in this service today, as my mom told me back in February, her spirit is still very much with me and with all of us.